Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue disassembling this engine. Where we left off last time was I cleaned off all of the carbon buildup on the ridges of all the cylinders here. And like I promised, let's go ahead and pop the pistons out today. I'm a little bit disappointed because I actually wanted to finish the ignition system tune-up episode before. I started back on this, but I actually found out that I have a faulty ignition coil. So I ordered a new part and I have to wait for it to come in. So to pop out the pistons, we're going to remove these rod bolts. But before we do that, we should measure something called a side clearance. And side clearance refers to the wiggle room between the rod, or the side of the rod, and the crankshaft. Excessive clearance here, anything above apparently 0.6 millimeters, could result in low oil pressure. And what you want to see is something half of the max clearance, which is 0.3 millimeters. So you want to measure this by pushing the rod to one side and sticking in a feeler gauge to see what the clearance is. So 0.3 does not actually fit in the side. So I'm going to step down to 0.2 millimeters. So 0.2 does fit between the rod and the crankshaft. So what that means is my side clearance is something in between 0.2 and 0.3, at least on the first rod. So I'm gonna go ahead and check every single one of them. And this is actually kind of important to me because I do want to use the same rods. I don't want to go out and buy a whole new set of rods that would exceed the budget that I have in mind. If you want to be really sure, you can also push the rod to the other side and double check the other side. But it seems like all of my clearances are something in between 0.15 and 0.25. I'm going to assume that that's not an issue and move on. Cool, now we're going to go about removing the pistons, and I actually removed 4 pistons before I realized the camera wasn't even rolling and I was just talking to myself the entire time. So let's remove this 4th one. So we're just gonna use a impact driver to loosen, or just slightly loosen up, the 2 rod bolt nuts here. And this is a 14 millimeter. If you plan on reusing the rod bolts and nuts, make sure that you know exactly where they came from so you can install the hardware in the exact same positions. I don't know if I'm going to be using any of these hardware or not, but it's just good practice to keep track anyway. So now that the nuts are removed, we can try to take out the rod cap. You want to inspect the rod bearings very closely. So what you're looking for is any uneven wear or any scratches or dimples or gouging inside the bearing that would suggest that there was a contaminant that got stuck in the bearing, which ended up scratching the surface. Again, it's not that I'm going to be reusing this bearing, but it's good to check just in case you see something that you don't like and you don't want to encounter the exact same problem when after you rebuild the engine. And before you push out the piston, I'm gonna install these vacuum caps. A 2-inch piece of fuel hose would also do the trick. And what we're trying to do is prevent these threads from touching the crankshaft and scratching up the bearing surface. And by the way, I forgot to mention, when you are removing the pistons, you want to position them at bottom, not at top dead center. And to push out the pistons, I made this little contraption here. This is just a 1/4-inch extension that I'm using. I think you're supposed to use like a long wooden rod, which I don't have in my garage. so this will have to do, but I covered it with a silicone or a spare piece of silicone hose so that the metal isn't scratching up against anything when I tap on this. So I'm just going to place this at the bottom of the piston, and using a mallet I'm going to go ahead and just give it a tap, and it should start moving really pretty easily. And once it starts moving, you want to make sure that it's not falling out of the bottom. Just make sure you catch it before it does. There is the 5th piston. So a few things to check here. You want to check the other side of the bearing as well. And you want to just make sure that this piston rod moves fairly easily with the piston top. This notch indicates the side of the piston that should be facing forward. So since this is a notch here, it was placed in like this. And another thing, since we have the piston out, we can see that there's 2 compression rings. So there's one, and then there's another one right beneath it. And there is the oil ring. The bottom oil ring job is to essentially scrape off the excess oil from the sides of the cylinder bore. So we're gonna remove these caps. And to store it, we're just gonna install the rod cap exactly as it was and screw the nuts back. And we're gonna store it with all the other pistons, making sure I know exactly where these came from. I don't know if this marking was from the factory. I imagine it wasn't, but this one actually already has markings. It has 5 dots, which means that this was the 5th piston, and all of the rod caps actually have this marking. So that's pretty convenient, so I can kind of mix up the pistons, and as long as I have the right rod cap, I'll always know which piston it is. Now before you go any further, just try to rotate the crankshaft by hand and see if it rotates really freely without any resistance at any point in the rotation. What we're checking for is pretty much straightness of the crankshaft. So these are 17 millimeters, and I'm gonna try to use this, I'm gonna try to continue using this impact driver, but if the driver is not strong enough for this, we'll have to just upgrade to an impact wrench. Wow, that's a lot of noise, but it worked. So all of these came out really pretty easily. So we're gonna remove this one first. Just tap it with a mallet side to side. It should come loose. There we go. And you can see that there's an arrow which points to the front of the engine, and there's also an F, which indicates that this is at the front of the engine. So I'm just going to replace the bolts exactly where they came from. And same thing with this one. It might just take a lot of side-to-side tapping to get it loose. And just wiggle it free. So this one also has an arrow, and I think all of them do. And this one also, the previous engine builder put in 2 small dimples here to mark that this is the second cap. And as you do this, you want to continue checking all the bearings. And this one again looks pretty clean. So these main bearing caps were pretty easy to remove. This one and this one will actually need to put a little bit of extra force to get it out. And that's what these threaded holes are for, so you can thread a bolt in there and pop it loose. If you have like a slide hammer pulley tool, that would probably work. I have this crowbar that I'm gonna try to use to take it out. But before I do that, I'm going to try to take out this oil pump sprocket and the timing chain sprocket. So I think you can just slide this one out. I'm gonna try to just take a block of wood and see if I can Yep, so this one just came loose. You can see that there's a little you can see that there's a little passageway for it to pass the keys here. And the sprocket I should also be able to just tap out. There we go. We'll take a Ziploc bag and store these together. And I could pop out these keys here, but I think that's probably optional. I'm actually not gonna go ahead and pop these out. So we can continue pulling this one out. I'm gonna take out the bolts first. So what I'm using are 2 long bolts out of the, out of the front cover. And the guide says to use these bolts to thread them into this hole and try to use a crowbar to take it out. Well, that wasn't that great. I guess that's one way to get it out. If you take a look at this bearing here, this is not in such great shape. There's a whole bunch of scratches here. So this is probably the worst bearing that I've seen so far. But if I take a look at the crankshaft, you know, it is, no, actually it's not scratched up at all. It looks, never mind, I take that back. It's it's a little scratched up, but I am pretty confident that the machine shop is just going to be able to polish this crankshaft and it'll be fine. Well, I think I just have to remove it 1 millimeter at a time. Look at that. It's coming out. This is one of the more jankier things I've done in this assembly. But it works. Check that out. So checking in on this bearing. Ooh. Yeah, this one doesn't look that great either. There it is. You can see kind of a weird wear mark right here. And this doesn't seem to have worn very evenly from side to side. And I bet you guys are tired of me talking about these bearings. So I'm gonna stop. I just wanted to show you guys what it looked like. So we're gonna put the front cover bolts back into the Ziploc bag, although we destroyed them. So at this point we can also just pop out the crankshaft seal. And of course this will have to be replaced, but I guess I'm just gonna keep it anyway. Alright, so I'm gonna attempt to now lift this crank out, except I have no idea how heavy this is. But it can't be that heavy. And I'm just gonna set it on that dolly right there, at least for now. Oh my god, okay. It's not that heavy. Alright, the crankshaft has been removed. And we're just gonna take a flathead screwdriver and just pop it out. And we're gonna put them right next to their respective main bearing caps. Just a light tap will get these out. I don't think this one can be tapped out, or maybe it can. There we go. Whoops. Alright, I think the only thing that might be left to do before we send this to the machine shop is take out this oil baffle screen. If I can do it without stripping the screws. Woo, these are stuck in there. Oh, I think I just pulled something in my shoulder. Oh, jeez. It would be really annoying if I stripped this screw right now, because this is literally the last thing that I have to take out. Yep, the screw completely stripped, so I'm just gonna try to drill it out now. Of course this would happen on the last freaking screw. I was just really hoping that it didn't have to. Well, after wrestling with this screw, I apparently lost the battle, because the screw just decided to break off, and that's just another thing that I need to add to the machine shop list to have them get done. I don't know why this baffle isn't coming out. Why is this simple thing so hard? What am I not understanding? There we go. Here's one of the screws, and the other one is just embedded in there, and I'm not going to bother taking that out because I'll just probably ruin the threads. Well, there's a little screen in here that I'm supposed to be able to pull out, but I can't because there's a wire in the way, and I think that wire is desperately trying to do its job of holding the screen in. But I'm going to try to just pull it out. Wow. Look how dirty this thing is. There's all kinds of crap in there. I don't even know what this screen was supposed to do. I think it was actually just a screen that blocks the oil from getting inside or traveling up the crankcase ventilation hose right here. But this thing is so clogged up that I don't think anything could have passed here, including air. Look at all this crud inside. Glad I removed that. Okay, I think that is really it for the disassembly. So on the next episode, we're gonna go ahead and make a checklist of everything that the machine shop needs to do, including take this sheared screw out along with the oil plugs and the water plugs, and we'll send this block off along with everything we just pulled out, I guess. So stay tuned. See you guys next time.